jealous love.
Jealous love.
I also talked about the fact that jealousy, though it has a negative implication in today's world, is not the case when it comes to how it's defined of God. The scripture is very clear that God is jealous. He's a jealous God. Whatever is his, he wants to be his.
Right.
And so if what is his is not operating like it's his, he becomes jealous because he has ownership of it. And one of the things that we talked about last week was that jealousy always has an ownership attached to it. So in a relationship, husband and wife, the two belong to each other, the two become one, the text says. And so jealousy is a possessive love. And so no man in his right mind, no woman in their right mind who is in a relationship would not feel certain things if, in fact, what they should have is given unto another. And so the Old Testament concept of God revolves around the concept of a jealous God, or a God who, in fact, has made a claim upon our life. And that kind of love, if you remember I talked about last week, also demands levels of loyalty and commitment. And so in that relationship, God expects his sons and daughters to be loyal unto him. I keep running over without exegeting the text out of Hosea, but this was the relationship, again, with the prophet now marrying the prostitute. And God became jealous of that. And to demonstrate the nature of his love to the nation of Israel, he did it through this relationship between a man whose wife was beloved of many people, and God was not really pleased with that. So it's the Old Testament concept of love as it relates to our Heavenly Father is really a concept of jealousy or of ownership, and it requires of us a sense of commitment and a sense of loyalty. Then I think we talked a bit about the New Testament and with Jesus, and even he would argue in the gospel, according to Matthew, that no man could love two masters. He would either love the one and hate the other, but he could in no wise love both. And so the illustration that he makes is of loving mammon and loving God. And so we know that that can't happen. We talked a little bit, then we evolved into a discussion of a definition of love called brotherly love, and the fact that the text reminds us that we are to love each other as God has loved us. And so Matthew chapter 22, we looked at it for a moment because we had to define what a neighbor was. And we looked into the parable of the Good Samaritan, and the question was asked of the Lord, who is my neighbor? And the answer given to the question was the story of the Good Samaritan. And so we see who is neighbor is anyone that is in need. It becomes our neighbor. Remember, it's line upon line, precept upon precept, precept upon precept. Here a little and there a little. That's how the Bible is exegeted. It cannot be done in silos or in isolation. And so every time you see a definition here, you should see a corresponding definition found both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And James will write unto us and remind us that if we saw our brother or our sister in need and did not meet that need and simply told them, I'm praying for you, then the question would be, how dwelleth the love of God in them? And so there is a brotherly love, a neighborly love, all expressed through a compassionate love one toward another. And then, I don't think we got here, well, yes we did. We talked a bit about the love of enemies. Let's go back for just a moment, and you'll remember on Sunday morning, and also on last week, I made points to emphasize that love was not an emotion but an act of the will. And there is no way that you emotionally tie into people that despise thee and speak evil of you and don't do you good, your enemies. And so that kind of love is not a love, in fact, that is growing out of the emotions. It is simply an act of the will. Everybody say an act of the will.
The act of the will.
And so we talked about the Greek word phileo, from which we get the name of the city, Philadelphia, and it carries the sense of being related. That when we talk about this brotherly love, we talk about treating people as if they were related to us, if they were our blood. And most of us were taught, and may have taught others, that blood is thicker than water. And so there's a certain extent we will go for brothers and sisters. Even in the text, we are told in the New Testament, do good to them, especially those that are of the household of faith. And so there is a degree of relationship that appears in Scripture. And this relationship, this brotherly relationship, this sense of treating one as if they are related is what this word means. It's used of spouses, of parents, of children. This is the kind of love that it should exist among the brethren. Everybody say among the brethren.
Among the brethren.
And so all of us should treat one another as if we were literally brothers and sisters. You'll see this concept, by the way, when you dig into the book of Acts. Now, Acts is a book of history, not a book of theology, so I want to get that out front. There's theology contained in it, but it is principally a history of the infancy of the church. If you want to know what the church looks like in its beginning stages, Acts gives us a historical perspective of the church from the point of the Apostle Paul with his great preaching, the effect of the preaching. You call it his trial sermon, I call it his initial sermon, and thousands got saved. And we see that during that course of time, the Bible said that they had all things common. So if Sister A had a need and Brother B had a surplus, then Sister A had no need.
Right.
Because surplus shared with need. Because that's how life is, whether you know it or not. Today you may be surplus,
Right.
but tomorrow you may be need. And tomorrow need may be surplus and someone else may be need. And the text says they had all things common. Now, one of the marks of maturity, as I define maturity according to the biblical narrative, is simple, and it's this: when you start to see life beyond yourself. Because there's some things that mature people will do that immature people will never do. The illustration I was making on Sunday about babies. As sweet as that baby is, or you weren't even here, so you're gonna get a new revelation in a minute. As sweet as this child is, as loving as the mother may be toward this daughter, the truth is, this child does not really love her.
Right.
Nor does this child know how to love her at this stage.
Right.
This child is needy. Needs to be fed, needs to be cuddled, needs to be changed, needs to be protected. The truth is, as human beings, we come into the world more vulnerable than almost any other creature that's on the planet. Right. If you watch some of the channels, National Geographic and all of that, you see those wildebeest come, that mama will pop that baby right on the ground, and in a matter of 20 minutes, that wildebeest will be up, struggling to stand, to gain strength, because if they don't learn how to run in a hurry, they're going to be eaten by some predator for dinner. Human beings are just the opposite. We come needy. We come needy. We will not survive unless there's someone who exercises great maturity to meet our needs, even when their needs may not necessarily be met. How many mothers I got in here? And when you had a child, and that baby was waking up through the night, wanting to get changed or fed and so forth, you had to get up whether you felt like it or not.
Right.
It was your maternal responsibility to do so, and you found great pleasure in making sure that that child was properly taken care of. But that child, as a child, does not know how to love. I earnestly believe we are taught to love. And that's why the people who teach us, it's important that the right folk teach us and we understand the distinction between love and lust.
Right.
And lust doesn't always have to be wanting to get into someone's bed. Lust has to do with your needs being first. And you'll do things to drive toward the meeting of your needs in lieu of meeting others' needs. And so this kind of love that we were referencing is a need that meets the needs of others. It is the mark of a mature saint. When he stops or she stops saying to himself or herself, can I get away with doing this? That's an immature approach to life. Can I do this and get away with it? How far can I draw the line in life and still stay with God but still march alongside in the world? The mature saint asks a different question, and we find it in the text. Paul would write and give this principle. It is not what is lawful. Now it becomes what's expedient. Paul would argue to the Romans that if my brother is offended by me being a meat eater, then around him I will eat no meat.
Right.
Now that's not being hypocritical. It's understanding the culture of the day, of them winning from other pagan religions who perhaps ate pork. And the Jews had a very strict diet. To this day, the true Orthodox Jews eat kosher food. They don't eat certain stuff. Some stuff they will never eat. Muslims, obviously, don't eat pork, or most of them, unless you bring a really good ham sandwich with cheese. But most of them don't eat pork. That's just a joke. Very strict on the diet. And the notion being, it's not what I can get away with, but if I say to my wife something that I might be able to say to her in confidence, and now it impacts a younger marriage, then I will refrain from saying it so that I don't impose something on his marriage. Am I getting through on this?
Yes, sir.
There's some things that are not about legality, they're about expedience.
Right.
And so the mature saint thinks differently than an immature saint. And it's the same concept when we start talking about this brotherly love that comes from the Greek word phileo. It has to do with relationship, treating someone as if they were your own people. I think this is where we dropped off last time. So the second kind of love I want to talk about tonight, and this begins our discourse tonight, that was just a review bringing us up, is a kind of love that in the Greek, most of you would run to agape, but agapeo. Everybody say agapeo. I want to deal with this kind of love before we get to agape, because there's a slight difference between agapeo and agape. And agapeo is the kind of love that has within it a direction of the will. Everybody say a direction of the will. Now, this is a love that has no basis for initiating an action out of an emotion. Nor is it a love, nor is agape a love. Both of them are not responses to people's actions. And this is key, because this is the question when it comes to couples that every pastor I know of that marries them asks that couple standing at this altar. The question is, will you love them? Has nothing to do, there is no question, do you love them? The question is, will you love them? Will you direct your will toward them in sickness or in health? In riches or in poverty? The question is, what do you say? No? We got, oh Lord, let's get the oil, because we got to pray for her. Then I see somebody splashing some water. Holy water. The question is, will you direct your will to another person? without asking for anything that is given in return. And it's not just the direction of the will. Catch this, because this is really important. The second aspect of this love is finding joy in doing it. See, you ever wonder why the Lord would say that if you love me, you'll keep my commandments? How could love ever be expressed in a task? If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. No, the real issue is you'll find joy in doing the will of the Father. And love is expressed through this direction of the will, and it finds joy in giving and granting to another. At the end of the day, Brittany will have Zoe, and she will spend several years with this daughter and her son, and she will give and give and give and give and give and give, and she has no guarantee of anything being returned.
Right.
Did y'all catch that? Now she's going to make a deposit and will trust God to honor His word that as she brings them up in the right way, that when they get old, they will not depart from it. But what she does now is simply expressed in giving. Giving of time, giving of sacrifice, making deposits in their lives. And in the long run, finds great joy in making sure that each one of her children has everything that they need. It is this kind of love, agapeo, and never brotherly love, never filio, that's used of a love toward enemies. Everybody say, never brotherly love.
Never brotherly love.
See, when it comes to our enemies, who we are commanded, let's name some things that we're commanded to do with our enemies. Huh?
Pray for them.
We're commanded to pray for them. We're commanded what else?
They need a coat or clothes, you're supposed to give it to them.
You're supposed to give it to them. What else? You're supposed to love them. What else?
Pray for them.
Huh?
Pray for them.
Pray for them. Huh?
Make them your footstool.
Make them your footstool. That's David back there.
Yes, sir. Let's say that.
You know, and that's a real issue for us. I wish we would not think that we are so far above being humans. That, you know, we wrote a play in college, a series of plays entitled When Super Christian Goes to the Club. And when Super Christian does this and Super Christian does that. Because some people believe they just jump in a phone booth, come out, they're super saints, and now they love everybody, they forgive everybody, they have a heart's desire fully toward everybody. But the reality is, even David would declare in the Psalms, hey, God, why don't you get them and get them in a hurry? He wanted revenge on his enemies. But we read in the text, remember, line upon line, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little. We read in the New Testament that God says to us, vengeance belongs to me. You don't get to exercise, touch your neighbor and tell them, you do not get to exercise vengeance. Once you are a saint, and you decide you're going to get people back, what you have said to God is, I don't trust you to do the right thing. And now I'm going to handle my own business.
Right.
And God said, no. Vengeance belongs to me, and I'm good at paying folk back.
My Lord. Oh, God.
And you know, the problem is sometimes is our payback ain't God's payback. What we want to do to our enemies may not be what God wants to do to our enemies.
Right.
Think about this, and I see that. Think about this. Think about the Apostle Paul, who prior to his being stopped on the Damascus Road by an angelic host, a light shining from heaven to stop him, he had a history of being there when the saints who were being killed. Matter of fact, text says he was holding the coat for folks.
Yeah, I know it.
Now, I ain't going to pull the knife, but let me grab your coat so you can kill folks. And we would have thought that the best thing to do is get this killer out of the way of the saints, but not God. God's approach was to take his sight from him, give him an insight that he never had to Scripture, and then remind him that he had chosen him to suffer for the kingdom's sake. And later he would become one of the two pillars of the New Testament church. It was this man who the church would not accept. So God gave him a running partner almost in those days, a mentor, whose job was to pray for him. And even when he was tasked with doing that, he said to God, ain't this the killer?
Right.
And the Lord said, get up off of him. He's a praying man now. See, God had a payback that was not the same payback that we would have done. And so vengeance is never something that we could biblically operate in this present world with when we're the Lord's, and we have to trust our enemies even to God's hand. We're commanded to love them, to heap coals of fire upon them. And in doing so, you never know who you're going to win, who was your enemy. I have some friends right now who we didn't start off very well. But now, we're great friends. And then I got some friends we didn't start off well, we still ain't well.
Well, do Jesus.
And I'm praying that the Lord will keep my heart through all this process. You know, even in church you can have people you don't get along with.
My Lord.
You can even have people in church you don't particularly like.
My Lord.
Because like and love ain't the same thing, by the way.
Dang.
You're never commanded to like everybody.
My Lord.
But you are commanded to set the direction of your will toward others to their good. And that's what God did when Romans 5 and 8 said, but God commended or demonstrated his love toward us, and that he sent his son to die for us. Yes, ma'am.
But sometimes I don't think they said we don't trust God. We want to see.
True. At the end of the day, there may be issues in our heart that are unresolved and undealt with, and we say, I don't feel like being in the spirit right now. Right. There's really something I really won't say. You know, what's that old saying folk would say? I got to say something because the Bible said if you tell the truth will set you free. Well, it don't say that. No, that's just a misinterpretation of what the scripture did. It said, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. It didn't say you had to tell the truth.
Right.
Because sometimes the worst thing you can do is tell the truth. I'm not saying to lie. I'm saying sometimes you have to hold your tongue.
Right.
Because sometimes truth cannot be received by the hearer.
Listen.
See, you have to perceive whom you're talking to.
That's right.
And even the Bible says, cast not your pearls before swine. Because what happens?
They turn and rend.
Lest they trample them under their feet and turn and rend you. Because they don't know the price of the pearl.
Right.
Take $1 million pearls, go next door and throw them in the pig pen or in the chicken house. And I promise you, they will tramp over the pearl to get to some corn.
That's right.
Why? Pearl has no value to them. They don't know the value of the pearl. And that's why there are times when the best thing you can do is keep your mouth closed.
That's right.
Because otherwise you're about to get hurt.
Right.
The moment they trample over whatever you say, they're going to turn around and you're about to get attacked.
That's right.
That's what the text says. And you have to be mindful that you can't say everything to all people the same way.
Right.
There's some folk that when a person's more immature, you have to take a more condescending approach to that person. It's only mature people you can really talk forwardly to.
That's right.
Because some folk don't want to hear the truth.
Right.
They don't want to deal with certain aspects. They'd rather just simply be congratulated and affirmed and told everything's all well. I was on a conference call about a week and a half ago, and there was some problems. And so They said, well, Elder Kershaw, you're the expert in this area. What do you think? I said, well, let me give a perspective before I answer the question of my recommendations. I said, now historically, and I started to set the foundation for my answer, and then one of the persons on the phone said, hey, we don't want to hear that, Kershaw. All we want to hear is solutions. We're in a solution-driven meeting. Well, they didn't have none. That's why they asked me on the call. So I backed up. I got mad. And when I get mad, I get silent. Some people get loud. Some people cuss you out in their mind. Some cuss you out loud. I am having issues when I get taciturn. Because I shut down just like this. Huh?
That's good.
Yeah.
I've been telling you that for years.
What?
So I shut down because I've always had a thing. Late King tell you when we met from day one, I brought baggage. By the way, in relationships, every one of you bring baggage.
Right.
Now, if you haven't figured that out, you probably don't know what baggage you're bringing.
Right.
And you better go figure that out in a hurry. Because there's some baggage you can't take on a plane.
That's good right there.
And there's some baggage you can't get through TSA.
That's right.
Some baggage you better never bring into a relationship. And yet, there's some baggage we all bring into relationships. In our case, the reason why I shut down is because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of arguing going on. Just mouths running, arguing, ain't ever accomplishing nothing. And I'd get in a corner, wouldn't say nothing, and just observe, just shut down. At the end of the day, I never saw an argument that amounted to anything after it was completed. And I used to say Late K all the time when we first got married. Because I said, here's my baggage. Oh, I wish I could help somebody tonight. We didn't go in with the notion that it was just going to be this grand honeymoon.
Right.
I said to her, here's my baggage. Number one, let me teach my lesson. I'm coming over here.
Go ahead.
So when we had a disagreement, and she's talkative, I'm introverted, except when I get up like this and doing this. I'm really the shut down, watch everything, observe what's going on guy. And those who were at my house all the time kind of know it. I'm just there. And so we'd have an issue, and then she'd go telling me her issue, and I just sit there. And I just look.
Like a bowl.
Now, I'm telling you this for two reasons. One of which is really principle, is that what I did was done out of immaturity and as a coping mechanism.
Teach, sir.
And so she talked and I listened. And then at the end of half an hour, however long she felt like talking, she'd go, you ain't gonna say nothing? No. You have nothing to say. And I shut down because all I wanted was me to be out of hearing the issue. At the end of the day, though, she still had an issue. Even though she got it out of her verbally, she got nothing beyond that except getting out of it verbally.
Right.
And then we were back to square number one. Am I helping anybody now?
Talk, sir.
And so I would shut down. When I had something to say, it was said really, really straightforward. There was no... no, I'm not going to say that. There was no tact to those issues. You wore them on your shoulder.
You hurt my feelings, though, for real.
You wore them on your shoulder.
Tell me your story.
You wore them on your shoulder. and so it never got resolved because you really had two people just trying to get their way.
Right.
Most time, you know what that's the root of most relationship problems is selfishness. And I never came to grips with that until we were on our way to counseling one night.
Right.
I mean, we were bad. We were a mess. And we would head down to Reverend Griffin's house.
Right.
Only because it was the only way to stop the noise. So
No.
she wanted. No. I'm being honest. I'm not saying it in a negative way. I'm saying it was how I failed to deal with it.
Right.
And so we went on the road, and to get on her nerve, because she had got on my nerve, as I was riding about this far from the car in front of me, 70 miles an hour down the interstate. Knowing she's sitting on the other side, because I ain't even looking at her, my eyes straight ahead. But she's sitting there just nervous because, you know, I'm driving down the road. Right? And I did it to make her nervous. Can I testify? So y'all think you always were mature.
That's right. Come on, Pastor.
And we get down there, the old man says to me, it's your fault.
Yes.
He ain't even heard nothing yet. He ain't heard my side, ain't heard her side.
Right.
And said, you the head, and it's your fault. You should make this better.
Yes.
Right now,
That's good right
See,
there.
now the women come back. You see that, brothers? How they were way out there on me before. I don't know. He's saying the right thing, going all that.
Yes.
No. I'm gonna silence you like they do in the old church. And the old man said, listen, at the end of the day, you have to make it better. He didn't say you got to solve it,
My Lord.
but you got to make it better because you're the head. And the responsibility head in relationships, when you get to be really selfish, you see people pulling in opposite directions and they pull back to have their own needs met. Remember I told you that this kind of love, unlike phileo, is a love that directs the will toward another and must find joy in meeting the other person's need. I wasn't finding no joy in
My
this
Lord.
because I was self-directed.
My Lord.
And when you direct your energies in the wrong direction, you usually have two people who pull away, and as long as they're pulling, they can never come together as two being one. They literally rip each other.
My Lord.
And that's what makes divorce such a tough issue. I don't care how good or bad the relationship was. At the end of the day, you brought two, made them one, and the only way to make them not be one is to rip the relationship up. And there's always going to be some degree or level of pain that's involved in that process. This kind of love must express compassion. Everybody say compassion.
Compassion.
And so we're commanded to agape our enemies, to do what is ever is necessary to turn them to Christ.
My Lord.
Isn't that what Jesus did on Calvary? He could have come down.
My Lord.
He had legions of angels that he could have commanded. Think what legions could have done when one did to the Assyrian army in one night. And that's why the songwriter said he would not come down from the cross. He had us in mind.
Yes.
That's love always directs its attention to the good of another. And so it is the kind of love, in fact, that is directed toward our enemy. But never, look at someone and tell them, never to befriend.
Never to befriend.
Filio, the brotherly love, befriends, but not agapeo, which is directed as an act of the will, but must find joy in meeting the need of another. That's why when it comes to sinners, we direct the love of God toward them. The task is, as ministers of reconciliation, to bring them back into proper relationship with God. But we are commanded, come out from among them. Don't filio them. It's not about hanging out. It's about winning. And agapeo is the kind of love that demonstrates a commitment toward the good of another. And then finally, the third, and there's one more, but I'm only dealing with three basic definitions of love tonight, is the more famous one that most of us know, and that's agape kind of love. And this kind of love really is a reference to God's love. Everybody say a reference to God's love.
Reference to God's love.
It is God now directing His will toward us. And so God's love is such that it is a love that is in spite of everything. It doesn't care about what brought you to the table. What it really cares about is meeting the need. Here's the kind of love that should be demonstrated by the saints. Someone walks in the door and they are sloppy drunk. The question is never how you got drunk.
Right.
The question now is how we meet the need of the drunk. Someone walks in and says, I have AIDS. The question is not, did you get it out of IV drug use? Did you get it because you were born to a parent that had it? Did you get it because you were involved in a homosexual relationship? No, that's never the question that's asked. It's how can I meet the need of the person? Because this kind of love is a love that is a love in spite of. Everybody say in spite of.
In spite of.
It involves God doing what he knows is best for man and not what man desires. This is what parents do with their children. Their love is not what the child wants. Their love is about what's best for the child. And anytime you have a filial love with your child first and foremost, and it drives the relationship, you're going to be in trouble because you'll spend your time trying to stay their friend rather than be their parent. And there are times they will come to honor and respect you at the end of the day that you love them in the right way. I know intermittently I testify to this, but when I got to college, I wrote a letter to my mother. I'm not one at writing emotional, sentimental, all kinds of issues, but I wrote a letter to her, and I said, thank you for the days you made me come from high school while my partners hung around till varsity practice. I came home, had to cook and clean, and then take my daddy's old Fury station wagon and go back to practice. Thank you for the chores. Every Saturday, it was like a drill sergeant around our home. My father had us, some of us were in the yard, some of us were, when we lived in Florida, you painted these rocks that lined the grass. We had chores. And I didn't understand how important this was until I moved off campus, was living by myself, and had to cook and clean and do all those things. And I wrote her and said, thank you that you didn't allow me to do what my other folk did. And then I made my pledges all send her a letter and tell her what a wonderful son she had. And she was a most gracious woman after those days. To this day, she has no clue that they were forced to write that letter. Wasn't a willful act of their own. I told them, you're going to write this woman and you're going to tell her her son's the best thing on the planet since sliced bread. And she knew better, but she believed it anyway. To exercise this love also involves some discernment. To see what is the need of people. We talked about the brother in the Good Samaritan and the question about who is my neighbor. Look at what he did. He just didn't do a random act of kindness and compassion. In fact, he carefully ordered the care of the man, from what he could do then to what would be his needs until he returned. He directed every aspect to meeting the need of him, and that's the way our love should be. We are never told to befriend our enemies with filial, because we would then have their same interest. But we're always commanded that we should love them. And love has many expressions. Everybody say many expressions.
Many expressions.
Now when you go back to 1 Corinthians 13, you'll see this, because love is expressed in so many ways. And I dare you this week to go back and look at 1 Corinthians again. And when you read of the text, you'll find all of these in 1 Corinthians 13, and every one of them is an expression of love. Patience. That's love. That's love that is being passive. Love not in a hurry. Now, Brittany may not be in a hurry for that child to grow up, because, sometimes they just love them at this age. When they get to the next age, then you want them to hurry from and miss the toddler. Get on up where you can do for yourself. Love really never hurries. Love is patient. Everybody say patient.
Patient.
Because love must grow. Your love must grow. Your love of others must grow. Others' love of you must grow. And so people may not love you like you think you're worthy of being loved. They just simply may not know how, or have been taught, or have exercised the will. And so one of the ways love is described is it's described as being patient. In other words, it's just not in a hurry. Second way, love in action. The word in the 1 Corinthians 13 is called kindness. If you ever want to see expressions of love, find the kind folk, because they're expressing a form of love. When you just mean to everybody, I told somebody, maybe I shouldn't have, this is part of my mouth sometimes when I do say stuff, I don't necessarily couch it on the terms, but I said to somebody, you too ugly to be mean. I said, you too ugly to be mean. And I didn't mean that from the sense of we have the ability to put people on a scale, but they're just ugly in their approach to everything. Everybody, there's always something wrong. There's always somebody who done something. Always somebody who's trying to stop their way. And finally I just said, listen, you cannot be this ugly and also be mean. It don't work like this. You got to be kinder to folk. And you wonder why you don't have no friends but that one person who's just as mean as you are. Love, when it comes to action, the word is kindness. This ought to be, as the text said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, by the love. See, that is what ought to define all of us as saints of God. Thirdly, the love in competition. That's being generous, giving. See, one of the things that all of us excel in some area, and we are wanting in other areas. Nobody in here has got it all together. Just like nobody here has all the gifts of the Spirit. It just don't work like that. God don't make all the deposit in one. He, however he pleases, however he sets the members in the body, so he also disperses the gifts that are needed. But one of the challenges that we have sometimes in life is the fact that you got to grow in some of these things. And growing can be painful if you're not careful. Now, generosity is something that worries my wife more than me, because she thinks at the end of the day, when I get out of this world, I will have given most of my goods and my money and all that I have to everyone else. And she's partly right. I mean, I plan to be generous. And that may be the distinctive element here, is I plan to be generous. There's no, it just haphazardly happens. It just doesn't haphazardly happen. I plan it. I discipline myself to give. So whether it's a giving to the Lord's church, I think I told you I've got certain goals that at the end of the day, as I liquidate any bills I have, pay off the mortgage, my goal is to eventually be able to give at least 50% of everything I have to the local church. Doesn't count everything else I do. But I live at the end of the day to be in a position to give. And so it's tough, because once you make the decision to grow in generosity, you're going to have some challenges that will come your way. Every week there's a minimum amount that the people in the office know, because they read the envelopes and mark it off, and they see every week there's a minimum amount of money I give to the church. Minimum. But then, every time I see one of these college students come home, I make sure, they go, Pastor, I'm going back to school. Wait a minute here. I go back in my office and go find my wallet, and sometimes, like I do now, I got a gift card or two. Some people gave me gift cards for Christmas. I still got them in my wallet, because they become giveaways to people at that point. I want to bless these kids who they don't have no job. They're in school. I want them to remember that the church has been wonderful to them. I hope you'll get this. They will keep loving the church if they see the church loving them. And I need them to love Jesus, because with that stuff they got to face, it ain't nothing like we face in our day. And so I'll make sure I run back. Here, get your little cheeseburger, go about my business. At the end of the day, You must learn to grow in generosity. You don't have to have money to be generous with people. Sometimes it's spending time. What's your specialty? What is it you do well on your job? Is there another kid here who you know wants to be what you are when you grow up? Well, spend some time with them. Bring them on board. Every year, Deidre called me to read to them, those children in her middle school. And I only missed it this year because I couldn't be there. I was out of town. But I go and I read to these kids. And when she first asked, I go, I'm not reading no middle kids. Kids read for themselves. And then I thought, there might be some benefit because she's promoting real men read.
Yeah. I like that.
And as preachers,
Well,
the worst thing you would have is a lazy preacher who won't read or study. Just give me another chance to go read something else and maybe meet someone else, maybe engage someone else. Be generous of your time. Set aside some time for someone else every week. Doesn't have to be major. You ain't got to set out the whole day. Set an hour out. Set 50 minutes out. Set 30 minutes. Do something for someone else where they would be unable to do for themselves. One of the things I said to God this year is I need to create more wow moments for other people. Moments they may never experience if I don't open the door. So every time Krista, one of the girls, calls me and says, I got tickets, call Peter or the brothers, I got tickets to a game. Who wants to go? I got access to this. Who wants to go? Because at the end of the day, make it habitual that this aspect of love is always increased in your life. At the end of the day, people ought to look at you and say, they're a giver. They give, they give, they give. And the church has had a bad reputation for taking and taking and taking. And as I told you before, we almost have become like the prostitute. Take your money, give you a great experience, send you home tired and broke, and then wait on you to come back with some more money. That's not what ministry ought to do. We ought to be found about the business of giving. Another aspect of love is love in hiding. See if you pick out what this one is. Love in hiding. No parades. It's called humility. You ain't got to flaunt it. Just do it. Just do it. Nancy Reagan had that piece right. Just do it. Don't make a scene of it. Just do it. You don't have to get your name called out. Just do it. And if you do it, you'll soon discover that that's how love is. It doesn't flaunt itself. It is expressed humbly. I teach you, be guilty of random acts of kindness. Do stuff that people cannot repay you back for. Don't give them an opportunity to pay back. You know someone lost their job, ain't been working for 3 months. You ain't gotta go, well, you know, Lord's really been good to me. I haven't lost my job like you. Y'all ain't gonna help me. Folk are crazy sometimes. Find a way to minister to them, but do not parade it. Share in their life. And in my case, I would always just, I've done it two ways. One way is, I know people sometimes have financial issues, so I call them in and say, I want help. Do you have a budget? They do. You mind if we go over your budget? If they don't, can we create a budget? And most times you'll discover that if you're vested in being generous, you may pick up the $29 Visa bill they got on their monthly budget. Say, listen, I'm going to help you pay off another bill, so I'll take the $29 bill for the next 12 months. That's my bill. But you got to use the $29 to pay off another bill. Y'all see what I'm saying? Ain't got to parade it. And in that way, they still have to work, but they're getting the benefit now of partnership and working toward meeting a goal. There are ways we can do it. We just have to find ways to do it. When you do it, this kind of love just retires. Doesn't walk through the church testifying about it retires and goes about the business of loving someone else in another kind of way. Love in society, or being courteous. Men, we ought to be opening doors. We shouldn't have to ask folk when it rains, watch them come in dripping, carrying 2 children, can hardly get out the car. Or is it, yeah, must be raining outside. No, we see it raining. Those of us who are men ought to just move to knowing maybe we got to walk umbrellas to the car and go get the folk from the car. We might have a widow at the church. She should never have to go get her oil changed. We have to go get the car and go change oil ourselves. Ooh, it's quiet in here tonight. That's the kind of love that ought to be. Now, I don't bake, so you can't expect no cheese and macaroni and cheese. All right. Love that seeks the good of others. It's not selfish. Unselfishness is an expression in 1 Corinthians 13 of love. Love and disposition. Have a good temper about yourself. Smile. Touch the neighbor and tell them, smile. Don't always look like you just lost your mama before you come to church. Smile. Let your disposition be such that it says something about your life. Never let it be said that I would never want to be one of them, because look at them. Look at how they look. Look at how they face life. That should not be among the saints. We ought to have such a disposition or a temperament about ourselves that people ought to know it's an expression of love. Love and conduct is called righteousness. If you love me, the Lord said, you'll do what?
Keep my commandments.
Keep my love is expressed through obedience. At the end of the day, you can't say you love your parents and you did everything against what your parents told you to do. That's not an expression of love. It's an expression of disobedience. Same principle God used with us and says that if you love me, it's expressed in an action of righteousness. And so we have to work on that, because maybe it says we don't love God as much as we think we do. Because I couldn't really be loving God if I'm always backbiting, if I'm always stealing, if I'm always never showing up and work on time and leaving early. All of these are character traits. Everybody say character traits. Character traits. And so love is expressed also in this conduct called righteousness. And then it ought to be sincere. One of the texts that we'll get to later on calls it unfeigned love. It's not a love that is false. It's not a love you got to make up. At the end of the day, Lady K always says about Rachel. She says, you know, the two of them, talking about me and Rachel, they perfect in each other's eyes. And at the end of the day, I know every one of Rachel's imperfections. But that doesn't stop my love for her. End of the day, that's what it ought to be with the saints, is that it ought to just be sincere. A sincere. Take baby steps. You cannot do it from a distance. Touch your neighbor and tell them, never from a distance.
Never from a distance.
If you want to love folk, you have to engage folk. You don't, there's a kind of love, a brotherly love, that you can love the world. I love everybody. Y'all heard that testimony? I love everybody. Well, there's some folk, they ain't met yet. They don't know it yet, but there's some folk that will try every fiber in their being if they only met them. What they're really saying is, I love the people who I met. But to say, I love everybody, I'm not as braggadocious to make that claim yet. I'm getting and learning how to love all the people I engage. And I must admit, I sat with one of our bishops today and said, I'm having issues with such and such and such. And they just lies. At the end of the day, they're lying. I said, well, I better stop this, because now I'm starting to sound like the Republicans, but Bishop, they lie. They just don't tell the truth. And I pulled out some stuff and emails say, and here's why, look at this, they just lying. And he was like, Well, the bigger picture, Brother Kershaw, the bigger picture. And some on the inside said, I don't care about no bigger picture. They'll lie. Just acknowledge they'll lie. And at the end of the day, Bishop taught me a lesson. What real difference does it make to acknowledge something you already know? Let's fix it. Love has to have this sincerity about it, that it's not unfeigned, it's not mechanical. There ought to be a genuineness that exists. You know someone who taught me to work on this? Elliot, my brother. When I would meet Elliot, if he came to convocation or he met me somewhere because I was traveling and he was coming through and we'd golf or something, we would go to, last time I was in Nashville with him, we went into this restaurant and it was a barbecue restaurant and they took your name. And she said, what's your name? He said, Wonderful. And she wrote down Wonderful. So we went and sat down. And after a while, when they called, Mr. Wonderful. He said, that's me! and the folk in the restaurant go, who is this idiot? But that's how that boy is. He never meets a stranger. And I got to thinking about this because I would be so self-centered that I